The storm came in low, rolling like a beast across the Oregon coast. Sheets of rain smothered Haven Bay, blurring the lighthouse beam into a trembling halo. Wind slammed the shutters of an old cliffside cabin, where Ryan Maddox, 44, sat by the window with the dull patience of a man who had stopped expecting mercy from weather or God. Once a Navy rescue diver, his body still carried the wiry strength of duty, but the years had hollowed him out. His beard had turned the color of ash, his eyes the grey of drowned steel. He stared at the storm the way a man might stare at his own reflection in rough water, something shifting, broken, and too deep to look away. He lived alone now, 5 years after a landslide tore through his home, burying his wife Sarah and their little girl. Sarah had been a tall, pale woman with red hair that smelled faintly of salt and soap, a laugh that could still echo through his nightmares. Since losing them, Ryan had built walls of silence and alcohol thicker than the cliff itself. He still kept Sarah's old raincoat hanging on a peg by the door, a relic that mocked him every time thunder rolled. Tonight, thunder sounded like memory. Outside, the storm rose into a howl, rain splintering against the window pane. Through the chaos, something flickered, a piece of driftwood maybe, or debris from the dock. But then came a sound that cut through the storm's roar, a dog's cry, sharp and desperate. Ryan leaned forward, squinting through the sheets of rain. There, tumbling in the current below, was a plank carrying a German shepherd, its fur matted dark grey with patches of white, and 2 trembling pups clinging to her flank. The mother's eyes caught the lightning for a second, glowing gold in terror. Something inside Ryan cracked open. Without thinking, he tore the raincoat from the peg and stumbled into the storm. The wind shoved him sideways, rain slicing across his face like shards of glass. The path down the cliff was slick with mud and moss, each step a wager against gravity. His breath came in short, panicked bursts, the rhythm of a man drowning on dry land. He threw a rope around a post, clipped his old rescue harness, a thing he'd sworn never to wear again, and descended toward the screaming surf. His boots hit the shallows just as the plank spun toward the rocks. The cold hit him like electricity. Ryan lunged forward, caught the edge of the plank, and pulled with all the strength left in his arms. The rope jerked taut, then snapped. The current dragged him under, filled his ears with thunder and memory, the screams, the weight, the helplessness. But he kicked free, surfaced, and grabbed the shepherd by the scruff. The pups tumbled into his arms, small and slick as fish. With a growl torn from his chest, he fought back to shore, collapsing beside the cabin steps. The mother dog shivered against his chest, her eyes wide and frightened, but trusting. Ryan looked into them and saw the same amber shade as his daughter's. "You're safe now," he whispered, voice breaking. "You made it, Raven." The sky the next morning was the color of pewter, heavy and slow. The wind had quieted, leaving behind a silence so complete it seemed almost guilty. Down the hill, the old church of St. Jude stood half-flooded, its white paint scarred by debris and seaweed. Inside, lanterns flickered over rows of cots where townsfolk and animals huddled together. Ryan Maddox, limping from exhaustion, carried the shepherd and her pups in a toolbox he'd lined with towels. The air smelled of wet wood, candle wax, and antiseptic. He hadn't stepped into a church in years. Faith, like the sea, was something he no longer trusted. At the center aisle knelt Dr. Claire Monroe, sleeves rolled to the elbow, tending to a soaked Labrador. She was in her late 30s, tall, her brown hair tied back in a hurried braid that had already come loose. A thin scar curved across her right cheek, a souvenir from some past rescue gone wrong. There was precision in her movements, each gesture quick, decisive, the way only people who have lost too much learn to be. When she looked up, her eyes were a pale green that carried both command and grief. "Put them by the heater," she said, voice rough from shouting orders all night. "They need warmth more than prayer right now." Ryan obeyed without a word. Near the pulpit stood Reverend Blake, a thin man in his 70s whose white hair fell like wisps of fog around his ears. His cassock was torn, hands blistered from hauling sandbags. Despite the ruin around him, he smiled at every passerby, murmuring blessings as though hope itself were contagious. He thanked Ryan for saving the dogs, then moved on to console a crying child. There was something steady about the Reverend, a man anchored by faith even when the tide tried to take it. Ryan envied that. The generator outside coughed and died, plunging the nave into dimness. Claire cursed under her breath, and Ryan, without thinking, went out to fix it. The machine was clogged with silt. His fingers remembered the work instantly. Sparks flew, the hum returned, and light trembled back to life. Claire watched him from the doorway. "You used to be Navy?" she asked. He nodded. "Rescue diver." She only said, "Figures," and went back to work, though her glance lingered. A silent recognition between two people who carried the same invisible scar. Later that afternoon, a soaked Coast Guard runner burst through the doors with news. A rescue team had gone missing near the harbour. Among them was Eli Carson, 27, a sharp-jawed, freckled young man who had once trained under Ryan. Eli had been the kind who laughed easily and volunteered first, the kind who made others believe disasters could still have heroes. The news hit Ryan like a wave. He sat on a broken pew, fists pressed to his eyes. Somewhere outside, Raven whined softly, her head on his knee, as if she, too, understood that some ghosts never stayed buried. By dawn, the rain had thinned to a cold mist. Inside the church, the air was heavy with the mingled scents of wet fur and candle wax. Ryan crouched near the heater, drying Raven's fur while her two pups slept inside a cardboard box lined with blankets. Dr. Claire Monroe knelt beside him, holding a small handheld scanner, a battered old veterinary tool she had rescued from her flooded clinic. Her fingers, pale and steady despite the exhaustion, brushed the shepherd's neck. The scanner beeped once, then glowed faint green. Words appeared on the cracked screen. Owner, Eli Carson. The sound that followed was not thunder. It was silence. Ryan's chest tightened as though someone had reached in and twisted his heart. Claire blinked, her mouth parting slightly, eyes wide with disbelief. "Eli," she whispered, voice breaking on the name. Ryan stared at the screen, trying to reconcile the impossible. The young man he'd trained, who had once joked about naming his dog after a storm bird, Raven, because she's got survivor eyes, was the same man now listed as missing off the coast. His jaw clenched, the old guilt surfacing like salt through skin. "He's not gone," Ryan muttered. Claire looked at him sharply. "Ryan, it's been 2 days. The current's out there." "If his dog made it back," Ryan said quietly, "he's close. She wouldn't leave him if he wasn't alive." His words hung between them, equal parts hope and defiance. Reverend Blake approached, his expression grave. His wrinkled hands held a damp radio, static whispering through the speaker. "There's a new alert," he said. "The Maple Dam north of here is cracking. If it gives, the lower valley will flood again." His voice trembled on the word again, as if the town hadn't already drowned enough. Claire turned pale. The church stood right within the evacuation zone. People began packing what little they had. Amid the panic, Raven lifted her head, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the doorway, as though sensing something distant. Ryan followed her gaze to the direction of the harbour. He knew before the thought fully formed, he couldn't stay. That afternoon, while volunteers shouted and sirens wailed outside, Ryan found Claire loading her truck with medical kits. She looked up at him, rain dripping from the ends of her braid. "You're thinking it too," she said. He nodded. They didn't need to explain. Both had lived their lives saving strangers. This time, the one who needed saving was family of the heart. Raven, restless, paced near the door, her paws leaving muddy prints like signatures of loyalty. "You don't have to come," Ryan said. Claire gave a short, humorless laugh. "Neither do you." As dusk bled into night, Ryan left a folded note on the church altar beneath the dim flicker of a candle. "Don't wait for me. I have to do this." Then he slung a rope, a flashlight, and his old rescue pack over his shoulder. Raven padded at his side, quiet but resolute. The church bell swayed in the wind above them, tolling a sound that was half prayer, half warning. And as they stepped into the drowned streets of Haven Bay, the first echo of thunder rolled again, like a promise being tested. The wind had turned savage again by nightfall. Rain fell in sideways sheets, swallowing the world in grey. The roads out of Haven Bay were gone, drowned beneath a pulsing tide that reached the treetops. Claire gripped the steering wheel of her battered pickup, her knuckles white under the stuttering beam of the headlights. Beside her, Ryan Maddox sat in silence, scanning the radio that hissed between bursts of static. Raven, the German shepherd, stood in the truck bed, ears back, her fur slick with rain. She was restless, whining low, as if she could feel her master's heartbeat somewhere in the dark. "The signal's fading," Claire said. "It's coming from the rescue depot by the marsh." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "That's 3 miles into the flood zone." She met his look. "You said he might be close." The depot loomed out of the storm like a ghost, a corrugated steel building half swallowed by water, its red emergency lights flashing weakly through the mist. The place had once stored rescue boats and diving gear. Now it groaned under the weight of the flood. Ryan tied a rope around his waist, the other end to the truck bumper, and slung his waterproof light over his shoulder. "Stay with the engine running," he told Claire. "If the current shifts, pull me out." She nodded, her soaked braid clinging to her neck. "Don't make me have to." Her voice trembled despite her bravado. Inside, the depot was a cavern of dripping echoes and flashing red light. Water reached Ryan's chest, cold enough to bite through his jacket. Floating crates bumped against his shoulders. Rescue vests, flares, oxygen tanks. Ghosts of another time when he had led men like Eli through chaos just like this. Raven followed close, swimming beside him, her head barely above the rising water. A faint groan of metal drew his attention to the far corner, where a collapsed rack of diving cylinders pinned something beneath. He waded closer and froze. It was Eli Carson. The young man was pale, half-conscious, his freckles ghosted by exhaustion. A steel beam trapped one leg at an angle no body should endure. "Ryan," he rasped, voice a shredded whisper. "Didn't think you'd come." "Save your breath," Ryan growled, crouching beside him. The water was still climbing. He gripped the beam, muscles straining, but the weight was too much. "Claire!" he shouted. She was already forcing her way inside, the flashlight in her mouth, her face streaked with mud and rain. "He's alive!" she gasped. Together they heaved, but the beam wouldn't move. Then a deep crack split the air, the sound of the anchor column giving way. A surge slammed through the door, water exploding into the depot. "Go!" Claire screamed. Ryan ignored her, cutting through the tangle of twisted metal with his dive knife. The current tore at them, ripping loose cables from the ceiling. As the floor gave way beneath them, Ryan's rope snapped. He shoved Eli upward, forcing air into his lungs as the torrent hit. "Hold him!" he roared to Claire, his voice vanishing in the flood. A beam struck his shoulder, dragging him under. Darkness swallowed everything, until a flash of silver moved through the chaos. Raven dove after him, teeth clamping onto his jacket. Her growl, muffled by the water, was the only sound that told him he wasn't alone. He kicked upward, lungs burning, until his hand broke the surface. For a moment, he caught the faint light of the emergency lamp before it sputtered out, leaving only the sound of breathing, ragged, human, and alive. Then the light died completely. The first thing Ryan Maddox felt was heat, not the cruel, choking warmth of the flood, but the steady pulse of fire. When he opened his eyes, the ceiling above him was made of cracked timber, flickering gold in the dim light of candles. The familiar scent of wet wood and smoke told him he was back in the church. He tried to move, but pain flared sharp in his ribs. A soft voice stopped him. "Don't," Claire said, kneeling beside the cot. Her face looked carved by exhaustion. Dark circles smudged beneath her green eyes, hair damp and tangled against her cheeks. The candlelight softened her features, made her look fragile in a way she never allowed herself to be. "You were half drowned," she said. "Lucky Raven found you." He turned his head and saw the shepherd lying on a blanket near the wall. Her grey and white fur was matted, one front leg bound in a splint. Even hurt, her eyes were alert, watching him with quiet loyalty. The pups, Scout and Ember, were curled beside her, small and breathing softly. Ryan's chest tightened. He remembered the roar of the collapsing depot, Eli's pale face, the water closing over his head. "Eli," he rasped. Claire's expression flickered. "He's alive. Bruised, half frozen, but alive. We pulled him out." Relief came slow and heavy, followed by something darker. "I saved him," Ryan muttered, staring at the candle's trembling flame. "And now I'm going to watch this whole town die." Reverend Blake moved between the cots, tending to the injured. His once white cassock was stained brown from the flood, but his voice remained calm. "We'll endure," he said quietly. "We always do." His optimism felt like a wound Ryan couldn't bear to touch. He swung his legs off the cot, ignoring the pain. Claire caught his arm. "You're not going anywhere. The dam's gone. It's over." But then the radio on the pulpit crackled to life. A panicked voice shouted through static, "Maple Dam has failed. Secondary wave approaching Haven Bay. Seek high ground immediately." The words froze the room. In the corner, Eli Carson stirred from his cot. His face was pale but determined, eyes bright with the reckless fire of someone who had stared death in the face and wasn't finished arguing with it. He pushed himself upright, wincing. "There's an overflow gate north of town," he said hoarsely. "If I can get it open, it'll take some of the pressure off before it hits." Claire turned on him, furious. "You can barely stand. That gate's underwater. There's no way back from that." Eli met her gaze and smiled faintly. "Some things are worth the price." Before anyone could stop him, he limped toward the door, wrapping himself in a soaked rescue jacket. Claire went after him, but Ryan caught her wrist. "Let him go," he said, his voice hollow. "He's doing what I once did, trying to trade his life for forgiveness." She turned on him, tears streaking her, dirt-smeared cheeks. "Then stop him before he dies for nothing!" Ryan stood, leaning heavily on the pew. His body protested, but the decision had already been made. He glanced at Raven, who tried to rise despite her broken leg. "No," he whispered, kneeling beside her. "You stay. Protect her." Raven pressed her muzzle into his hand, eyes glistening with something that looked too human. He turned back to Claire. "If I don't come back," he said quietly, "keep her safe. All of them." She shook her head, but he was already walking toward the door, the candlelight chasing him into the rain. The storm had grown teeth. Rain sliced through the night like shattered glass, and the wind howled across the valley, carrying with it the sound of something ancient breaking apart. From the ridge above Haven Bay, the remains of the Maple Dam gleamed under flashes of lightning, cracked concrete, twisted steel, and a torrent of black water screaming toward the town below. Ryan Maddox stood at the edge of the service road, drenched to the bone, the flashlight trembling in his hand. His leg still ached from the collapse, but his eyes burned with a different pain, the kind that only comes when a man has nothing left to lose. Somewhere ahead, through the roar of the storm, he could hear the faint metallic hum of the auxiliary floodgates. And maybe, just maybe, Eli Carson still alive. Down the slope, the maintenance tunnel gaped open like the throat of some beast. Ryan descended, half crawling, half sliding. The air grew hot and electric. Every flash of light revealed walls streaked with rust and oil. Inside, the sound was deafening, the roar of water hammering through pipes and the tortured creak of steel. He found the lower door half buried under debris. When he pulled it open, he saw Eli pinned beneath a fallen control console, his face pale, one arm twisted awkwardly under the wreckage. "You're late," Eli gasped, managing a broken grin. Ryan knelt beside him, his beard dripping. "You always did pick the worst spots to take a nap." The banter was a shield. They both knew what this meant. "Power's fluctuating," Eli muttered, pointing weakly toward the flickering control panel. "If we can open Gate B, it'll divert the pressure." By the town time. Ryan's eyes followed the live wires sparking dangerously near the floodgate release lever. "That current will fry you before the gate even moves." Eli just shrugged, the ghost of a smile still clinging to his lips. "I was never good at retirement." For a second, Ryan saw his younger self in the boy's defiance, and the memory cut deep. He reached for his dive knife, slicing through the cables pinning Eli's leg. The water was rising fast now, up to their waists, then their chests. A new rumble shook the tunnel. Metal screamed. A seam along the far wall split, unleashing a jet of icy water that nearly knocked them off their feet. Ryan grabbed Eli under the arms, dragging him toward the maintenance shaft. Above the chaos, a sharp bark echoed through the wind. Raven. The shepherd appeared at the tunnel mouth, soaked, her splintered leg dragging, eyes blazing with panic. "No!" Ryan shouted. "Stay!" But she leapt anyway, plunging into the torrent, swimming toward him. Another thunderclap, then the unthinkable. The main floodgate detonated, a shockwave of air and water slamming through the chamber. The world became noise and motion. Ryan threw himself over Eli as the blast tore through. Steel beams snapped like bone. The current ripped them apart. Ryan felt himself dragged down into darkness, spinning through cold and debris, lungs burning. Then, impact. Pain. Silence. He found himself wedged behind a maintenance panel, the world above gone. Hours, or maybe seconds, passed before light returned, pale and trembling through the gaps in the wreckage. He heard a whine, soft but alive. Raven. Her muzzle pushed through the twisted steel, blood and rain streaking her face. She pawed weakly at his arm, and he moved, barely. His fingers brushed her fur. "We did it, girl," he whispered through cracked lips. "We did it." When the first sunlight broke through the storm, the valley was still. Claire Monroe and Eli stood on the ridge, staring down at the wreckage below. At first, all they saw was water and ruin, until a faint bark rose from the mist. Claire dropped to her knees, covering her mouth. There, half buried beneath the twisted beams, was Raven, tail flicking weakly beside the motionless shape of Ryan Maddox. And then, impossibly, his hand stirred, rising just enough to rest on the dog's head. 3 months had passed since the night the storm nearly erased Haven Bay from the map. Spring came softly, washing the salt from the streets and coaxing green back into the hills. The air still carried the scent of seaweed and smoke, but now it was mixed with something gentler. Hope. Along the coastline, where debris once floated like ghosts, men and women worked rebuilding homes and docks. Among them limped Ryan Maddox, his frame leaner now, his gait uneven from the injury that refused to heal. A scar traced down his temple, fading into the short grey of his beard. Yet there was something alive in him again, a quiet steadiness that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with peace. At his side walked Raven, her left hind leg replaced by a sleek metal brace that clicked softly against the planks. She moved slower, but with the same fierce dignity that had pulled him from the flood. At the edge of town stood the Haven Rescue Center, its white walls new, its yard filled with the echo of barking dogs and laughter. The sign above the gate read, "Raven's Light," painted by local children in uneven yellow strokes. Inside, Dr. Claire Monroe supervised volunteers. Her hair, once perpetually tied back, now fell loose to her shoulders, touched with sunlight instead of ash. She had become the calm center of the town's recovery, focused, patient, unyielding when others faltered. When people asked why she named the center after a dog, she smiled and said, "Because that dog never gave up on a drowning soul." Eli Carson had returned to full strength, though the faint stiffness in his left arm betrayed the damage done that night. The boyish grin that once came too easily was rarer now, replaced by a steadier confidence. His uniform bore the new insignia of Haven Bay's rescue chief, and every morning before training began, he touched the tag that still hung from Raven's old collar. Eli's name scratched into the metal years ago. "You kept her alive," he once told Ryan. "Guess that makes us even." Ryan only smiled, the corners of his eyes creasing. "No, kid. She kept us both." The dedication ceremony was small but solemn. Families gathered near the repaired lighthouse, its lantern polished and waiting to shine again. The mayor, a stout woman named Margaret Hensley, with kind eyes and a voice like gravel softened by whiskey, stood at the podium. "We rebuild not just our town," she said, "but our faith in one another." Then she stepped aside, letting Claire speak. Her voice carried over the hush of the sea breeze. "There are people who disappear so others can be found again," she said, glancing toward Ryan, "and some lights never go out. They just wait to be seen." As the crowd applauded, Ryan turned toward the lighthouse. The keeper flipped the switch, and golden light spilled through the glass, cutting through the mist. Raven barked once, sharp and joyful, her tail sweeping against Ryan's leg. He rested his hand on her head, eyes reflecting the beam as it stretched across the bay. "We made it," he murmured. "All of us." For the first time in years, his smile didn't feel borrowed. It was his, earned, steady, and free. The tide rolled in, soft against the rocks. The last light of Haven Bay shimmered across the water, carrying with it the quiet truth that some storms don't end. They just teach us how to begin again. Sometimes, God's miracles don't come with thunder or light. They arrive quietly, in the shape of a loyal dog, a stranger's helping hand, or the strength to forgive ourselves. The storm that nearly took Haven Bay became the very thing that taught them to love again. Maybe that's how faith truly works. It doesn't rescue us from the flood, it teaches us how to build an ark. So wherever you are tonight, if the waves of life feel too high, remember, God still sends light, even through the cracks. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little hope. Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage and grace. May God bless and keep every soul who watches with an open heart.